Amidst the desolate stretch of road where the whispers of the wind sang tales of the lonely, a lone figure appeared, not unlike a specter from the past. To Ellie, he was just another drifter, a cowboy whose silhouette seemed etched against the vast canvas of the dying day. But oh, the secrets that lay beneath that weathered exterior. He was no mere wanderer. He was a man who owned half the state, a heart long untouched by love, now stirred by the sight before him.
You look like you could use a miracle or a mechanic.
His voice cut through the evening's calm, startling Ellie as she wrestled with the innards of her truck, its steam rising like the spirit of the Old West. She nearly dropped her wrench, her eyes squinting through the dust. There he was atop a black horse that seemed to have stepped out of a forgotten era, his hat pulled low, his shirt as rugged as the land he claimed. "Depends on which one you're offering," Ellie replied, her voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. With a half-smile, he dismounted his boots, crunching the gravel with a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. "Well, I left my miracle kit back at the last ghost town, but I'm decent with engines and horses, if you've got those too." The sun was setting fast, painting the sky in hues of surrender. Ellie's phone was dead, her sanctuary still 10 miles away. The distant howls of coyotes sang a song of urgency. "Truck overheated? Or maybe the alternator's shot. I'm no expert." She admitted, her pride slightly bruised.
Mind if I take a look?
He asked, his movements deliberate yet unhurried. She nodded her eyes, never leaving him as he approached the engine. His name was Robert. Just Robert. A name as simple as his demeanor, yet it left her wanting more. He worked with a seasoned grace, his hands moving with the familiarity of someone who had coaxed many a machine back to life. The sun kissed the horizon goodbye, and in the fading light, Ellie watched her heart echoing the quiet strength of this stranger. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows on the ground stretched, elongating like the quiet moments between strangers. "Do you live nearby?" Ellie ventured, her voice a soft echo in the growing silence. He simply shook his head, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. "Just passing through," he murmured, a fleeting traveler in this vast expanse. "Are you from this state?" She pressed curiosity, nibbling at her like the chill in the air. His response was enigmatic, a mix of proximity and detachment. Close enough to catch its scent, yet distant enough not to claim it as home. Ellie puzzled over his words, their mystery urging her to let the matter rest. Time ticked by, and after 20 minutes, he wiped his hands on his jeans, his eyes lifting to meet hers. "Your truck needs a tow. The radiator's busted," he declared, his voice carrying a weight of certainty. "I figured as much." She sighed, a resigned note in her tone. "There's a ranch about 10 miles west. It's mine. I've got a trailer and another truck there. If you help me hitch it, I'll treat you to dinner." His hat tipped in a silent agreement. "Deal." It took another hour to connect the truck to his horse, the silence between them filled with the clinking of gear as they loaded her supplies into his saddlebag. For a while, Ellie followed on foot, but soon, at his insistence, she climbed up behind him, awkward yet relieved, careful not to lean too closely despite the cooling night air. Upon reaching the edge of her land, an old wooden sign welcomed them, "Silver Bend Ranch, 1979. The porch lights cast a warm glow against the encroaching dusk. Horses in the pasture raised their heads, their ears twitching, but they did not approach. Robert led the way to the barn, where they unhitched everything in a companionable silence. "You any good with tools?" Ellie asked as they unloaded the supplies, her voice hopeful. "Depends on the job," he replied, his tone measured. "I've got a busted gate and a leaky roof, if you're looking for work. Just a few days, then I'll move on," he said, his words hanging in the air like a promise. "Just a few days," she echoed, nodding in agreement. Later that evening, in the cozy confines of her small kitchen, Ellie set down a steaming plate of stew and cornbread on the table. Robert, freshly showered, but still clad in his weather-worn clothes, sat across from her. The warmth from the hearth mingled with the aroma of the meal, creating an atmosphere of simple, shared humanity. As she watched him savor each bite with a quiet gratitude, Ellie couldn't help but notice how he never seemed to crave more than what was given. Their eyes met briefly over the rim of her glass, curiosity sparking in her gaze. "Have you ever settled anywhere?" she asked, her voice soft against the backdrop of the whispering wind outside. He shook his head slowly, his eyes reflecting a distant sorrow. "Not in a long time," he murmured the words, hanging in the air like a confession. "Running from something," she ventured, her heart beating a little faster. "Running toward peace." He corrected, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. His answer, so unexpected, struck a chord within her. The wind, now stronger, caressed the window panes with a gentle touch, as if coaxing the night into a deeper hush. Their conversation dwindled to a thoughtful silence. Ellie offered him refuge in the spare room of the old bunkhouse, a sanctuary next to the barn. He accepted with a quiet thanks, his figure silhouetted against the moonlit path as he stepped outside. She locked the door, her mind swirling with thoughts. "There was something about him," she mused, her brow creased with contemplation. "Calm yet distant, kind but closed off. A drifter cowboy, one of the old kind." Shaking her head, she poured herself another glass of water and extinguished the lights. But tranquility was short-lived. Just before dawn, a violent crash shattered the silence. Ellie's heart leapt into her throat as she sprang from her bed. The horse's frantic screams pierced the night. Rifle in hand, boots hastily donned, she dashed towards the barn. She hadn't gone far when she saw them, three shadowy figures, one already inside. A door dangled broken from its hinges. The sounds of a scuffle, the thud of a body against wood, filled the air. Trembling, she raised her rifle. But movement at the side caught her eye. Robert was there, moving with a grace that belied his usual calm demeanor. He seized one of the intruders, slamming him against a post with such force that the man crumpled. Another assailant lunged at him, only to find himself on the ground, his ribs surely bruised from Robert's swift punch and leg sweep. The third man, witnessing this display, hesitated, his eyes wide with fear. At Robert and Ran chaos reigned, until Ellie burst onto the scene, her heart pounding like a drum. Robert was already there, his presence a calm oasis amidst the turmoil, securing the stalls and soothing the horses with a gentle touch. "You okay?" Ellie gasped, her breath stolen by the sight of two men groaning in pain on the ground. "Better question for them," Robert replied, his voice steady, nodding toward the intruders. Ellie's eyes widened as she stared at him, a mix of awe and confusion swirling within her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Just Robert,
He answered, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. Robert was a man of few words and even fewer pretenses. By mid-morning the following day, he had not only repaired the barn door that had been broken in the scuffle, but had also reinforced 2 stalls and mended the loose hinges on the feed shed. Ellie observed him from afar, her paperwork forgotten, the end of her pencil idly between her teeth. She had seen many a man crumble under the weight of a stubborn horse, or lose their temper over a simple gate repair. But Robert, he moved with a serene rhythm, as if the world's expectations did not touch him. His hands, calloused, yet careful, worked without haste or boast. This quiet competence unsettled Ellie more than the night's intrusion ever could. She waited until the last nail was driven home before she approached him. He wiped his brow, turning as if he sensed her presence. "Thanks," she said, her voice carrying a note of genuine gratitude for last night.
He nodded, his expression
unreadable. "Do you get much trouble out here? Sometimes land like this attracts the wrong kind of interest, especially from those who want to take what they haven't earned." Robert remained silent, walking over to the trough to splash water on his face, the droplets catching the sunlight like small diamonds. "You ever learn how to throw someone like that in a bar fight?" Ellie asked, her arms crossed, curiosity piqued. Robert looked up, water dripping from his chiseled jawline. "Not exactly. You move like someone trained." She pressed her eyes, narrowing slightly. "Nothing," was all he offered, his gaze returning to the task at hand. He stepped closer, his voice tinged with a mix of frustration and curiosity. "You know it's real hard to trust someone who won't tell you a damn thing about themselves." He said, his words hanging in the air like the heavy scent of hay after a rain. He wiped his face with a rag, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that could melt steel. "You trust me enough to let me stay. That was before you started breaking ribs in the dark, like some ex-special ops." His lips twitched, almost curving into a smile, but the moment passed like a fleeting shadow. "Robert," he had told her, and she had retorted, "and I told you that doesn't fly here. You're either running from something, hiding something, or both. So which is it?" Robert's gaze drifted to the pasture where the horses grazed their peaceful munching, a stark contrast to the storm brewing between them. The wind tugged at the tall grass, whispering secrets that Robert seemed unwilling to share. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes people lose things," he murmured, his voice as soft as the breeze, carrying a crack of vulnerability that made Ellie pause. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the pain she sensed in him. "Well, you've earned a few more nights. That's all I'm saying." He gave her a small nod, his relief palpable. "That's all I need." Over the next few days, Robert settled into the rhythm of the ranch life. Up before the sun, he helped with feeding, mended a sagging section of the fence, and tamed Ellie's most temperamental mare, Dusty, with just a low whistle and a touch as steady as the ground beneath their feet. Ellie, meanwhile, wrestled with her curiosity, her questions slipping out like seeds in the wind, hoping to take root in his silence. She inquired about his past, where he grew up, what drove him westward, if he'd ever professionally trained horses. Yet every answer was a carefully constructed maze, each word a brick in the wall he seemed to be building, even as he walked beside her. One evening, after a day that felt like a century, they sat on the porch watching the sky transform from the amber glow of sunset to the deep, mysterious blue of night. Ellie broke the silence, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of her thoughts. My dad used to say, land was only as good as the people who walked on it. Robert nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. You believe that? She inquired, her voice a soft melody against the rugged backdrop. I believe, he began his words carrying the weight of experience, that the land remembers the hands that shape it and the feet that flee from it. Ellie tilted her head, curiosity dancing in her eyes. And which are you? He turned to her, then really looked at her, his eyes shadowed yet honest. I used to be a builder, he confessed, his gaze dropping momentarily. Then I ran, still figuring out which one wins in the end. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Ellie, with a playful tilt to her voice, asked, Do you work with horses because you love them, or because they listen better than people? Robert's chuckle was soft, almost lost in the wind. A bit of both. Ellie's smile was gentle. Do you ever think about putting down roots? His gaze remained on the expansive land before them. Sometimes I think about staying right here. He turned to her slower this time, his voice a whisper of hope. Would it matter if I did? Her heart skipped a beat, a tightness in her chest. I don't let people in easily, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Me neither, he replied, their eyes locking in a moment of mutual understanding. An acknowledgement, perhaps, or a silent pact. No grand declarations needed, just two souls weathered by life wondering if this time could be different. Then, from the distance, the growl of a truck engine shattered the tranquility, its tires crunching over the gravel road. Ellie rose, the tension returning to her frame like a familiar coat. That's Ray, she said, her voice now edged with concern. Robert observed the transformation in her expression. Problem? He asked, already sensing the shift. She nodded, her face grim. Big one. Just like that, the fragile piece they'd woven was on the brink of being tested. The truck pulled up dust, swirling around it like a cloak, its engine growling low, almost like a warning. Ellie stood frozen on the porch, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw set in a way Robert hadn't seen before. Ray stepped out of the driver's seat with an air of ownership, his presence as imposing as the land itself. He was tall, his skin kissed by the sun, wearing a tailored button-down that spoke of confidence and perhaps arrogance. Ellie watched Ray saunter toward the porch with the air of a man who'd been beckoned, his every movement calculated and slick. His smile was a broad, polished arc, the kind that gleamed with too much familiarity. Robert sized him up instantly, the distaste as clear as the sky above them. Ellie! Ray called, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. Long time no see. Heard your truck bit the dust. Thought I'd swing by, lend a hand. Ellie's reply was as flat as the plains stretching behind the ranch. Too late. Someone already helped. Her gaze flicked to Robert, who leaned against the porch post with an air of nonchalance, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Ray's smile faltered, his gaze shifting to Robert. Friend of yours? He asked the question, hanging like a challenge in the still air. Robert didn't dignify the question with a response. Ellie stepped forward, her voice firm. He's helping around the ranch. That's all you need to know. Ray chuckled, the sound hollow. That's so. I figured after what happened you'd be ready to talk business. The offer still stands."
It never stood, Ray.
Ellie snapped, her patience fraying like an old rope. "You just keep pretending it did." He tilted his head, feigning hurt. "Come on now. You know you're a heartbeat away from foreclosure, and I've got the means to fix that." "I'm not selling," Ellie declared, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her eyes. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You sure about that? Because next time, I might not come asking." Robert straightened his presence, suddenly commanding. "You threatening her?" Ray turned, his facade slipping. "Excuse me." Robert descended the steps with a calm, deliberate pace, his voice steady. "You came uninvited. You're pushing. I'd call that a threat." Ray took a half-step back, catching himself before he could show fear. "You don't know who you're talking to." Robert's smile was cold, not reaching his eyes. "No, but I know the type." Ray narrowed his eyes, his arrogance slipping back into place. "This ain't your business, cowboy." "It is now." Robert's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Ellie stepped between them, her hands up. "That's enough, both of you." Ray took a deep breath, trying to regain his lost ground. "You'll regret this, Ellie. You always do." With that, he turned, strode back to his truck, and sped off down the gravel road, his tires kicking up a cloud of dust that seemed to echo his abrupt departure. As the dust settled in the wake of the intruder's departure, Robert, with a voice barely above a whisper, inquired, "Are you okay?" Ellie, her fists still balled tight, nodded, but the resolve in her eyes was unmistakable. "He's not going to stop." She thought, her heart pounding like a war drum. Robert's gaze swept across the vast expanse of their land, his jaw set like stone. "Then neither will I." He vowed silently, his determination as palpable as the dust that hung in the air. That night, sleep eluded Ellie. She double-checked every lock, her flashlight a beacon in the dark, as she patrolled the fence line. Every rustle, every whisper of the wind sent her heart racing. Meanwhile, Robert sat in the barn, his blade singing against the wet stone in rhythmic, almost meditative strokes, his eyes never straying from the barn door. Just past the stroke of midnight, a harsh metallic bang shattered the night's silence. The horses, sensing danger, kicked and whinnied in panic. Ellie was already sprinting as Robert exploded from the side stall, his movements swift and precise. Two figures cloaked in the anonymity of black hoodies were in the midst of unchaining the stall doors. With a ferocity born of necessity, Robert tackled one to the ground. The second, brandishing a crowbar, swung wildly. Robert, with the grace of a seasoned fighter, ducked, countered, and twisted the man's wrist until the weapon clattered to the ground. 1, 2 punches, and the man slumped unconscious. Ellie, rifle in hand, reached them, her breath ragged. "You good?" she gasped out. Robert, his breathing steady, despite the adrenaline, nodded. "They weren't professionals, just hired help," he said, his voice cold. "Ray." Ellie spat the name like a curse. Kneeling beside one of the fallen men, Robert searched his pockets, extracting a note. No names, only a crudely sketched map of Ellie's property, a red X marking the stall. Ellie's blood chilled. "They were going to take the mayor," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Sell her damage, the ranch's reputation. Rising, Robert's eyes narrowed, his voice low and dangerous. "He's not just trying to scare you. He's trying to dismantle you piece by piece." Ellie felt a shift within her. a resolve hardening like steel. "I can't do this alone." She admitted the weight of her words heavy in the still night air. "You're not," Robert replied, his voice a promise of solidarity. The next morning, Ellie found him reinforcing the perimeter fence with fresh barbed wire. She approached, coffee in hand, the silence between them speaking volumes. "You didn't even pause last night," Ellie remarked, her voice a whisper in the stillness of the morning. Robert, his hands still stained with the earth, turned to face her. His silence spoke volumes, a tacit admission of his past experiences. "You've done this before," she ventured, seeking the truth behind his guarded eyes. "Why conceal it?" she pressed, her curiosity piqued by his reticence. "Because—" Robert began, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. "The last time I fought for something, I lost more than I could bear." His words hung in the air, a poignant reminder of battles fought and scars borne. Ellie swallowed, her throat tight with emotion. And this time, she wondered silently, meeting his gaze now softened by the morning light. "Still trying to figure that out?" he replied, his voice a blend of resolve and uncertainty. She gently placed the mug on the weathered fence post beside him, a small gesture of companionship. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm glad you're here." He nodded, a simple acknowledgement of her words, yet his presence seemed to solidify with that gesture. But in the recesses of her mind, Ellie knew Ray's saga was far from over. Robert, once a figure reminiscent of a rugged cowboy, now appeared more like a man sculpted by survival, his edges worn by the harshness of life. It all began with a box, an ancient relic of the past, hidden away behind a snarl of ropes and broken tack in the barn. Ellie hadn't sought it out. She was merely in search of extra blankets when she stumbled upon it, nearly tripping over its forgotten weight. The box was formidable, its corners encased in metal, the latch rusted with time. As she opened it, a plume of old barn dust enveloped her, the scent of history filling her lungs. Inside lay papers, a trove of neatly folded documents, their edges yellowed by time, bound with a leather strap. On top, an envelope addressed to J.D. Harrison in an elegant, precise script. She paused, her breath catching. J.D. Harrison. The name echoed through her memory, a ghost from the past, when it was splashed across every news headline. Robert D. Harrison, the silent partner, the architect of vast land and oil empires, who had vanished into obscurity after his fiancée perished in a tragic plane crash en route to a charity event. What followed were whispers of grief scandal and a life unraveled. Guilt, betrayal. Rumors swirled like autumn leaves in the wind. Some claimed he had lost everything in a hush-hush buyout. Others whispered with a shiver that he had staged his own demise. Ellie gazed at the envelope, her fingers trembling as she extracted the documents. Titles, deeds, trust papers, and legal letters, most signed with a flourish by Roberts. But not just Robert. Her heart pounded like a wild drum. Descending the ladder with unsteady hands, she made her way to the house, the need for confirmation gnawing at her. She fired up her ancient laptop, typed in the name, and there he was. A younger, clean-shaven version, sharp and polished, draped in suits that cost more than her truck. But those eyes, they were unmistakable. It was him, Robert D. Harrison, the man who once owned half the state, now sleeping in her bunkhouse, a man who hadn't loved in years. She found him later that evening in the pasture, his silhouette against the setting sun, inspecting the fence line with a young colt trailing behind like a devoted shadow. He looked up as she neared, reading the storm on her face before she spoke. "You found it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ellie stood there, papers in hand, her voice thick with betrayal. "You lied to me." Robert exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cooling air. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell. You let me believe you were just a wandering cowboy, a drifter with a quiet past and a few regrets. You let me trust you." "I never asked you to," he responded, his tone gentle yet firm. "But you knew I did," she countered, her voice shaking with emotion. He nodded, conceding the point. "Yes." Ellie paced her steps, agitated. "You're Robert Harrison, the man who vanished after his empire crumbled." "It didn't crumble," he corrected. "I walked away from it." She faced him, her gaze piercing. "Why?" He paused, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. "Because I built something I believed would change the world. And when the world broke it, I realized I had nothing left." Silence enveloped them like a heavy cloak, with only the wind's soft sigh through the parched grass to break it. Robert took a tentative step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted, for a brief moment, to shed my old skin, to be someone else. Someone not defined by wealth, legacy, or the fear of failure." His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Ellie's voice, when it came, was laced with bitterness. "And in this place where people saw only a man with a hammer and a horse, you let them. You let me." Her hands shook as she clutched the paper's evidence of his other life. "You told me you were running towards peace, but here you are still running, Robert." "I know," he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his sorrow. "And I'm sorry." Tears, hot and unbidden, streaked down her face as she looked up, her gaze piercing. "I didn't care who you were. I cared about who I thought you were." "I'm still him," Robert pleaded, his voice a mere whisper. Ellie shook her head, a profound sadness in her eyes. "I don't know who you are anymore." With that, she turned, her figure swallowed by the fading light, leaving Robert alone with nothing but the echoes of his mistakes. Behind him, the colt let out a gentle whinny, a poignant reminder of the simplicity he yearned for, yet could not fully embrace. For the first time in years, Robert stood still, the realization dawning upon him like a slow sunrise, what it truly meant to be seen and the steep price of hiding. Ellie left before the dawn could chase away the night, without a note, without a glance back. The box of documents remained on the kitchen table, untouched, a silent testament to the truths she believed and the doubts that now plagued her. She packed light her duffel bag and her spare truck, her only companions as she drove into town, seeking space, seeking clarity, seeking anything but Robert Harrison. That name now was a bitter pill. It signified that every moment of trust, every heartbeat of connection, was constructed on a foundation of half-truths. The man who had so gently mended her fences and ridden her skittish mares in silence wasn't merely Robert. He was a millionaire in disguise, a man with power far greater than he had ever let on. A man who had perhaps deceived not just her but himself as well. At the edge of town, Ellie secured a modest room at a quaint roadside inn, attempting to drown out the cacophony of her thoughts with the oppressive silence that seemed to weigh heavier there than anywhere she had been before. The day drifted by, and as she passed the hardware store on Main Street, a whisper of her name halted her steps. "Ellie, have you seen the news?" The voice belonged to an older rancher, his face etched with lines of concern. Perhaps Thompson, though she couldn't be sure. He thrust a crumpled local newspaper toward her, his eyes urging her to read. 2 more families pressured to sell. Ray Easton expands development footprint. Her heart sank as she snatched the paper, the headline glaring at her like a personal affront. The article was a punch to the gut. Ray Easton. Her former flame was aggressively acquiring land, his appetite for territory insatiable. Each family that had received his veiled threats either fled the town in silence or found themselves ensnared in legal battles they could ill afford. He wasn't merely threatening anymore. He was in the act of executing his plans. The final sentence twisted her insides, executing with no resistance. Easton Development expected to break ground within 3 months on the southern edge of Silver Bend, her land, her sanctuary. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The pressure, the threats, the break-in, the calculated attacks. Ray wasn't just targeting her. He was systematically draining the life from the valley, one deed at a time. And she had turned away from the only man who might have stood against this tidal wave of destruction. That night, the wind howled mercilessly outside her motel window. Ellie sat at the small rickety desk, the newspaper lying unopened beside her untouched dinner, a silent witness to her turmoil. Memories of Robert flooded her mind. His quiet resolve, the way he rose with the dawn, the scars on his knuckles, the deep sorrow in his eyes. He hadn't lied to cause her pain. He had kept his silence to shield her from the harsh realities he faced. She had fled not out of disillusionment with his identity, but out of fear of the love that had silently grown between them. The very thought of it had sent her running. Now love was the least of their concerns. Ray was on the verge of triumph, and Ellie needed not just care, but combat, not just comfort, but courage. As dawn broke, she returned to the ranch, the air heavy with the scent of dust and horses, and something more profound, a sense of coming home. The gate stood ajar, inviting her back into a world she had momentarily left behind. In the barn, she found Robert, his sleeves rolled up methodically, brushing down one of the colts. His movements were serene, as if the rift between them had never existed. She lingered at the threshold, silent, watching him. When he turned, their eyes locked, and in that gaze there was no trace of anger or accusation, just an expectant silence. "I read the news," Ellie finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression grave. "He's moving faster than we anticipated." "I know," she replied, stepping closer. "I walked away." "I know that too." His voice was steady, understanding. A long, heavy silence hung between them, her throat constricting with unspoken words. "I didn't come back for an apology or an explanation," she confessed. Robert's gaze was intense, searching. "Then why did you return?" "Because I need you," Ellie declared, her voice firming with resolve. "Not just the man who knows how to fix things with a wrench and a soft word. I need Robert Harrison, the man who built half this state, the man who can stop Ray before he destroys everything." His eyes softened, a flicker of something like hope passing through them. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," she admitted, her voice trembling, "except that You never stopped fighting, even when no one else saw it." She paused, gathering her courage. "And I never stopped wanting to protect this place. Or you." Ellie's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice a mixture of hope and determination. Robert, without a word, picked up a folder from the bench. It was marked in bold Eastston Holdings, LLC. "We make our stand," he seemed to say as he opened the file, revealing a blueprint for their next move. With a plan in mind, Robert declared, "And then we make it loud." Together, they stepped out into the morning light, a light that seemed to herald not just a new day, but a new hope. Ray had power, but they were armed with purpose. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would suffice to secure their victory. 3 days later, the old town hall was brimming with life packed to the rafters. Robert stood at the helm, his sleeves rolled up his tie, conspicuously, absent, his voice resonant, yet composed. Behind him, a large easel showcased a web of maps, deeds, and a meticulous trail of connections, names of shell companies, real estate transactions, and financial footprints that all pointed back to one man, Ray Eastston. Ellie, standing beside him, surveyed the crowd. There were farmers, teachers, and ranchers, their faces etched with a mix of anger, fear, and resolve. All were weary of silence. "I know I haven't given you reason to trust me," Robert began, his voice carrying the weight of sincerity. "But you all know Ray's offer isn't business, it's coercion. You've seen it, you've felt it. I've witnessed what happens when men like him go unchecked, and I'm finished watching." He brandished a thick packet of documents. "These are legal filings for an injunction. I'll cover the costs. All you need to do is stand with us." The room fell into a profound silence. Then an elderly woman, her voice quivering yet firm, raised her hand. "You really, Harrison?" Robert nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why help us now?" He paused, the weight of his past inaction palpable. "Because I didn't before, and I should have." A murmur of understanding and forgiveness rippled through the room. One by one, heads nodded, then bodies rose in solidarity. By the end of the hour, 25 signatures adorned the paperwork, enough to halt Ray's project. But everyone knew he wouldn't accept defeat so easily. That night in the quiet of the barn, Robert paced phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, we filed. The injunction hits first thing in the morning." He relayed, his voice tense with anticipation. "Which means Ray's out of options unless he uses force." He ended the call with a heavy heart. Ellie lingered in the doorway, her presence a silent question. "You think he'll show?" Robert's nod was resolute. "He has to." At midnight, the engine's roar shattered the tranquil stillness, slicing through Ellie's heart with dread. "They've arrived." Robert thrust a flashlight and walkie-talkie into her trembling hands, his voice firm. "Go out the back. Contact Sheriff Lang. Inform him of this madness." "I'm not abandoning you," she protested, her voice quivering with fear and resolve. "I'm not asking." He countered, his gaze intense, unwavering. Yet Ellie remained rooted to the spot, her eyes locked with his. Robert let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Then stay near me," he conceded, and together they melted into the night's embrace. On the other side of the pasture, headlights blazed to life, revealing at least 3 menacing trucks. Men leaped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Ray's voice, cold and taunting, pierced the air. Robert, show yourself. We both know this land means nothing without blood spilled over it. Emerging from the shadows, Robert's shotgun was at the ready, though lowered. You've made your move now. Retreat. He growled, his voice a low rumble of barely contained fury. You think some legal papers will halt me? Ray sneered, his confidence unshaken. No, Robert replied, his voice steady. But witnesses will. In the distance, sirens wailed a beacon of hope. Ray's face contorted in anger. You called the law. No, Ellie did. Robert corrected, his grip on the shotgun tightening. Ellie stepped forward, her rifle aimed true. Back off, Rye! He lunged at her, but a gunshot shattered the night. Ray crumpled, clutching his side, his men fleeing like shadows into the darkness. Ellie's heart pounded as she ran to Robert. Are you hurt? She gasped, her voice thick with worry. He managed a nod, though blood trickled down from a gash above his temple. Close enough, he murmured, a hint of relief in his eyes. Moments later, the sheriff's cruisers roared up their lights, painting the scene in strokes of blue and red. Rye was swiftly apprehended, charges piling up unregistered weapons, attempted assault, trespassing. The deputies needed no further proof. As dawn broke over Silver Bend, the legal battle loomed on the horizon. Yet the fiercest part of the conflict had ended, and in that first skirmish, they had triumphed together. Robert moved slower in the following days, his injuries a testament to the night's ordeal. The stitches above his temple, the bandages around his bruised ribs, spoke of the pain that now seemed to settle into his very bones. But for now, they had won, and Ellie felt a surge of pride and relief. In the quiet of their shared existence, Ellie observed Robert with a depth she hadn't before. She saw it in the lingering gaze he cast over the fence line where the wind played with the blades of grass, and in the subtle sighs he released when he believed her attention was elsewhere. Yet he never voiced a complaint, and she never strayed from his side. Their days unfolded in a harmonious rhythm, as if the past had never fractured their bond. They tended to the horses, strolled through the pasture, and nurtured the modest garden, nestled behind the barn. Yet beneath their silence there lay a newfound tenderness, a silent understanding that spoke volumes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, casting the sky in hues of peach and rose, Ellie found him by the corral. There he was, brushing dusty with strokes, as slow and steady as the heartbeat of the earth. "You're going to spoil her," she remarked, her smile gentle as a whisper. "She deserves it," Robert replied, his hand gliding down the mare's neck. "We all do once in a while." Ellie settled beside him on the bench, her hands folded thoughtfully in her lap. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she ventured. Robert didn't respond immediately. His thoughts, like the day's fading light, seemed to stretch into the distance. "Every day," he finally said, turning to her with eyes that held the weight of his unspoken dreams. "I used to think I was meant for building deals, projects, empires. But lately—" His voice trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the distant hills. "I just want to build something that lasts, something quiet, something true." Ellie felt a lump in her throat, her heart swelling with a mix of anticipation and nostalgia. "You have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reaching into his worn pocket, Robert retrieved a simple, unassuming box. Not velvet, not new, just as unpretentious as the man himself. He opened it, revealing a silver ring, delicate, and handworked with an engraving inside. Ellie recognized the script instantly. It was her mother's handwriting. Somehow, he had taken a line from an old birthday card she had left on the kitchen table and had it etched into the ring. "Come home when—" Ellie's breath hitched in anticipation, a moment of pure vulnerability, as Robert stood before her, not kneeling, not delivering grandiloquent vows, but instead offering her the silent, profound sincerity of his gaze. His eyes, a well of quiet, raw honesty, spoke volumes. "I haven't loved in years," he whispered, his voice a tender caress on the cool evening air. "And I didn't think I ever would again, not like this, not where it truly counts." Ellie's eyes welled, her heart swelling with the weight of his words. "I don't need a church," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I don't need a crowd. I just need you. And the sound of your boots on the porch every morning," he added, his smile both wistful and certain. Through her tears, Ellie laughed, the sound mingling with the soft night breeze, her nod a silent, trembling yes. Robert, with a gentle reverence, slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit, as though it had been crafted just for her, a perfect emblem of their union. They lingered in the encroaching darkness, the stars gradually unveiling their light one by one. No pomp, no spectacle, just the quiet, profound choice of two souls, each choosing the other irrevocably. After the cacophony of life, after battles fought, and hearts carefully shielded, they had returned home. This time, they would remain. A year later, the hills of Silver Bend shimmered with an emerald vibrancy unseen for decades. A gentle spring rain had passed, coaxing wildflowers from the once unyielding soil. Horses grazed their manes, dancing in the light breeze, while laughter echoed from the barn children's voices, vibrant and full of life. The ranch had transformed. It was no longer just a home, but a sanctuary. Ellie stood on the porch, cradling her sleeping daughter Wren against her chest in a woven wrap. The baby, with her father's steady brow and her mother's quiet determination, stirred slightly. Ellie's gaze drifted to a group of teenagers, their laughter filling the air as they saddled horses under the watchful eyes of volunteers. Across the field, Robert walked beside a boy, perhaps 10 years old, guiding him with the reins of a patient mare. His movements were slower now, but filled with a purpose that resonated through the very air of Silver Bend. Now, not from the weight of years, but from the weight of purpose, each step seemed to resonate with profound significance. The boy's laughter rang out a joyful chime in response to something Robert had said, prompting Robert to affectionately ruffle his hair. This was the legacy they had forged from the ashes of turmoil. After Ray's downfall and the legal battles that ensued, the community had united in a way Ellie had never envisioned. Strangers now stood together, their hands and hearts entwined in a common cause. The ranch had transformed into a sanctuary, a non-profit haven where equine therapy offered healing to veterans, at-risk youth, and families grappling with loss. Robert, ever humble, kept his name off the signs and plaques. He sought no accolades. His sole desire was to give back. Ellie descended the porch steps, her movements cautious to not disturb the slumbering wren, whose tiny head rested under her gentle hand. From across the corral, Robert's gaze met hers, and his smile, that serene, disarming smile, still had the power to melt her heart. "Morning, Mrs. Harrison," he called out, his voice carrying over the soft morning sounds. "You're late for breakfast, Mr. Harrison," she replied with a playful tone closing the distance between them. He greeted her with a tender kiss on her forehead, then peeked at the peacefully sleeping baby. "She's out cold, just like her father, after a long day on the fence line." Robert chuckled softly. "Fair enough," Ellie agreed, and together they strolled the golden rays of dawn, bathing the earth in warmth. A sign near the ranch entrance creaked gently, its wood freshly sanded and repainted, mounted on the original post her father had set up years ago. The new name, Harrison Ridge, was etched deeply into the timber, a symbol of rebirth and renewal. Robert, looking at it, exhaled slowly. "Think your dad would have liked it?" he asked. Ellie nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "He would have liked you," she affirmed. Robert's eyes softened, touched by her words. "Took me long enough to earn that," he murmured. She squeezed his hand, her touch a reassurance. "You earned it the moment you stayed," she said softly. They lingered there, the wind whispering through the hills, their daughter nestled warmly between them, the ranch bustling with the vibrant spirit of life. They had endured much yet. Here they stood resilient, and united, their hearts full of hope and love. But they had constructed something far greater, not with the tools of industry, but with the delicate threads of love, with unwavering honesty, with the silent commitment to choose one another each day, regardless of how the winds of change might blow. As the golden sun ascended over Harrison Ridge, Ellie gazed up at Robert with a smile that whispered of hope. "Let's ride," she murmured, her voice a soft caress on the morning air. He nodded in agreement, his eyes reflecting the same yearning. Together with Wren securely nestled against her mother's heart, they mounted their horses, their hooves gently treading the familiar path up the ridge to the very summit where Robert once stood alone, feeling lost to the world, believing he would never truly belong again. Now, at the crest, Robert's gaze swept over the landscape, not as a man adrift or a shadow of his former self, but as a husband, a father, a soul reborn precisely where destiny had intended him to be. Isn't it true that the most profound love stories often sprout not from spectacular displays or flawless starts, but from the fragments of shattered dreams painstakingly pieced back together with patient hands and tranquil spirits? Robert and Ellie didn't merely encounter each other. They discovered healing, a sense of purpose, and a sanctuary that money can't purchase, only craft with care. Because genuine love, the kind that endures, isn't about your past selves. It's about the journey you embark upon together, transforming into something beautiful, something new. If this tale stirred something deep within you, if it echoed the belief that even the most isolated heart can find its way back to love, then please join us at Soul-Stirring Stories. Subscribe. Let the bell chime its welcome, and become part of our family that cherishes second chances and love that touches the soul. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, no matter where you find yourself today, there's someone out there ready to ride home with you. Soul-Stirring Stories.